Hey everyone, good afternoon. My name is Nate Houghton. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Incendium, here with my very old, very good friend, Ali Hussain. Old friend, I guess you're not that old, although we are both relatively old
Yeah,
at this point, but the CEO of Tabs, a company that we've worked with quite a bit. We are customers. They have been customers of ours. We have a very good working relationship with Tabs. Ali has a great story to tell about how he came to Tabs and to create what they did. I think we can get into some of that, but yeah, Ali, introduce yourself. It's good to see you here. Thanks for joining us.
hey, good to see you. It's always good to see a good friend. It's been over a decade since we've been able to catch up almost, I'd say, every couple months. So it's great to finally get to be in this environment as well. But yeah, a little bit about Tabs. We're a venture backed company based here in New York, mostly going after automating the finance suite for many companies, particularly around order to cash and revenue recognition. One of the areas we think we can help clients in particular save time and collect faster and use AI applications is to automate a lot of the menial tasks around invoicing and calculating bills out of contracts and other types of order forms. So excited to just chat about what we're seeing in the market and also see a lot of the things you all are witnessing right now in this new era of AI and a bunch of changes in the macro in technology.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, we talked yesterday. We talked pretty frequently. But if just imagine, Ali, that like we graduated 7,000 years ago or whatever it was from college, and we hadn't spoken to each other until today. How would you tell the story of like what you were up to, and how do you get to a point where you started this company?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, like college, Ali, Nate, when you and I used to hang out, never thought I'd be fast forward over a decade later being in technology altogether. I think when you and I met each other junior year, I thought I wanted to be a professor. And so I think, like a lot of people in their early 20s, still kind of figuring it out and took some time after we graduated. I think you always knew you wanted to go into business and entrepreneurship. You're gonna have to check me on it, but I don't think.
It's funny you mentioned that. Yeah, maybe
Yeah,
deep down I did. I felt very confused, but
yeah,
you're probably right. You're probably
100%.
right.
I mean, I think if we both look back at the confusion, it would be kind of hilarious to be able to take a time machine and fast forward over a decade. But I mean, my evolution since then, since we left campus, was started basically thought I wanted to be a professor and went the more academic route, was a student of humanities and social sciences, left to what I thought was start a PhD and quickly realized, whoa, like my favorite parts were some of the more scrappy entrepreneurial type things I saw folks like you on campus doing, and kind of had this ambition to do something more in that direction. But again, confused, didn't know where to start. Was fortunate that someone employed me in business on the consulting side for a couple of years
So,
and gave
so I
me
was
a
gonna say like every confused 20 something, you worked for BCG.
exactly.
Yeah,
But
that
someone
makes
was
sense.
willing to take someone who had never touched Excel and PowerPoint and try be patient with me for a couple of years. But I think the ambition was always to try to learn how to build things and start early. And so I think when you and I kind of probably met again in New York, I was at my last company in the B2B hardware software space, a company called Latch. Started to learn a lot of the things around B2B, but it was really there when I started to look at systems more than anything. I mean, in being an operator, you deal with cloud infrastructure, ERP systems, Salesforce, HubSpot, and it was kind of in that architecture I got very fixated with the Office of Finance and the tools or lack of tools that were trying to move us from very manual workflows. And so early on was in QuickBooks, moved us to NetSuite. Within that journey, saw some really cool tools around payroll with companies like Gusto, JustWorks, and Rippling start to emerge. And I think it was in the COVID era when we started to see a lot of really cool advancements in accounts payable automation and spend management as Brex and Ramp and a handful of others really started to change how companies thought about automating workflows and software with their employees, that I started to look at the other side of the finance stack and I was like, man, order to cash, like actually taking all of your customer contracts and understanding them is really difficult. And how do we, in this world of artificial intelligence, try to create the best applications in finance or just in company operations? And became very fixated on that. And kind of 9 months with a really good team, kind of buckled down thinking about how we could build this is obviously when we started working with you and Incendium to try to get it in front of a ton of potential kind of design partners and
Mhm.
tab to be. And you all were great partners in getting us in front of just like hundreds, if not 1,000 or so prospects to really understand the space beyond kind of how we were able to as operators. And you fast forward 6 months from there, we shipped our MVP, and now we're getting to support a plethora of high growth clients in the US.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, like, if you're able to think about what changed over that 9 month period with maybe what you thought you were going after, what you thought you were building even, and what maybe surprised you the most by the end of it?
Yeah. And this is the first time like I've directly been a founder in B2B SaaS. And one of
Yeah.
the things I think a lot of entrepreneurs or those who have done it always talk about is the power of compounding and designing with partners. And I think
Mm.
in the beginning of the journey, I had my own hypotheses around some of the challenges. But again, those were very limited data set in my own seeing. So I think my own experience let me kind of be dangerous from a standpoint of where I think there were problems, but it wasn't really as helpful in understanding all of the ways to handle the solution or figure out product. And I
Hmm.
think it's that journey of just a ton of cycles of talking to really intelligent people and spending my Gladwell 10,000 hours that
Yeah.
eventually started to unlock insights from people who are far smarter than me and ones who had thought about the problem a lot deeper. And so, like, as an example, we knew we wanted to reimagine kind of the accounts receivable and revenue recognition category, but how upstream we would go to solve that and where AI could be a really good application came out of conversations. I remember there was a call with a controller about a year ago, and I just look at him on the call and he's like, Ollie, it's the contract, stupid. The number one reason all of this is so painful is not more software automation with emails and with payments and
Hmm.
everything else. It's this detailed data that sits in unstructured form that my team, I can't hire enough people to read this.
Yeah.
Systems don't tell me. And so those are the types of, I think, moments, Nate, that just listening and being malleable in the journey and then quickly building around insights was probably the most surprising outcome as a part of it.
And how do you find that? I think a lot of people, looking at this, or anyone that follows Incendium is looking at it from the growth perspective. As you're going through, and I know we had conversations when it was
Yeah.
happening about this, but as you're going through all those cycles on the product side, I call it like balloon animaling, right? Where it's, somebody walks up and they're like, I want a giraffe. And you're like, okay, cool. That's what Tabs is for you. And like, I want a zebra. And you kind of can make it that way. How are you able to avoid, to the extent that you're through this part of the process, how are you able to avoid like growth, sales, whiplash around that stuff where you're kind of building and selling something and like trying to
Yeah.
balance what it is ultimately going to be?
Yeah. It's one of those things you can't necessarily avoid it, but you can be very
Mhm.
cognizant of it. I think
Sure.
in the
Okay.
growth side of things, there's this concept, and you all are great advisors on this, is trying to find who your ICP is in your initial customer profile. And it's often through learning who your customer isn't,
Mm.
trying to be hyper growth and volume oriented, that actually really allows you to find who your customer is. And so I think like when we were partnering and we were sending hundreds, if not thousands, of outbound emails trying to get folks on calls, talking to the enterprise, talking to
Mhm.
B2B, talking to B2C, talking to SMB, different
Right.
segments, international. It's a lot of that growth hacking and talking to a lot of not fits that
Yeah.
ultimately allows you to understand who a fit is and understand who's the right customer. And so I think that pain in the journey, the more you just go through it up front, though it often in the moment is extremely at sometimes in the journey demoralizing because you're like, wow, this customer will never buy my product, or they just are so slow moving. I don't know how I could get 5 or 10 of these, or
Mhm.
their asks are so bespoke and just feels like services. If you don't go through those motions for at least a quarter or two to kind of more rule out who isn't your ICP, I think it gets really hard to then finally build conviction.
Yeah. And with that in mind, a lot of times founders will ask me if they think about building out a team. And we can talk about the fundraising separately, but what did you have a playbook for who to hire first and when? Were you actually able to follow that playbook, or is it more about talented people whenever they come across? Like, how is it that you looked at bringing in the right people? And were you too early on some of these hires? Have you been too late on one where you really wish you had someone in place?
Yeah, I think we lucked out. I actually
Yeah.
used there, and the problem is there's really no playbook. I think folks will say you're technical, you're not technical, and try to find that balance. And I
Hmm.
think that part was like table stakes. Like we have a technical co-founder who I think you find someone you really enjoy spending a lot of time with, and
Right.
is far more intelligent than you, and that's like table stakes. But I think there's value in both not doing it alone, but also if you're able to getting more than just two people in a room and kind of just having that thought. And so to me, the perfect combo is maybe three or four just really smart people. Obviously, folks who are curious, often really smart product thinkers, or really good at pattern matching different problems you see from a variety of places. And so we were fortunate, we're very early, we were able to get like four or five pretty diverse skill sets in a room running
Hmm.
through those cycles. I think that was immensely helpful. And then yes, there's a moment where you build conviction and you got to double down and you need the right kind of product design and at some
Hmm.
point engineering skill sets to start iterating very quickly. So that was the
Yeah.
form. I think the part on that I can't emphasize enough is we were pretty thoughtful, even as a very small team, to always meet in person. And oftentimes there's this, oh, like we don't have a large team, why do I, for a Zoom call talking to a prospect, need to be in the room with folks? And there's something about being able to quickly after the call jump on the whiteboard, iterate,
Yeah.
dialogue, even during the call, pass around notes, see each other's cues on, oh, did you hear the same thing? What do you think about it? And I think those elements of early company building have been now taken for granted, or people in the new world in the post COVID era say, you know what, at some point I'd like to get an office, but I'll do it after my seed. I say the
Hmm.
minute you're incorporated, the second thing you do is, if anything, get a WeWork all access pass and figure out where you can just buckle down and sling Zoom calls all day.
Interesting. Very cool. How has your job changed? Like, what is it that founders every 6 months, right, basically have a different thing to do? How many have you had at this point, and which did you like the best? Like, which do you wish you could go back to?
Yeah. I just want to, sorry, can you say that again? Like, particularly, you said my job in particular?
Your particular role. So it's like you have the same title. You've had
Yeah.
it the same title for a few years here, but I doubt you're doing, I don't know, 10% of the same stuff as you did a couple years ago. Are there things that are consistent? I'm curious what your
Yeah,
what your
I
role's
think
been like.
one, yeah, absolutely. So I think certainly over time, as we've gone from a team of three to 30,
Yeah.
starts to look like some functionalization. And I think I've always been someone who believes you just work with really smart, capable, independent thinkers who have their own agency to run off and help companies scale. And so I try to, in certain elements, not get overly in the weeds. So I think that's changed where when you're three people, you're in the weeds on everything from payroll to customer success. But obviously that becomes less scalable as you grow. I think the constant themes of what stayed the same is being very thoughtful about how much time you spend with the customer. And I think that is really important. And so whether it is still on sales calls, first calls, I try to join as many onboarding and customer success calls. Like just being with the customer and learning is, I think, still very much a continuum. So I think
Mhm.
that's the area that obviously gets a lot more interesting over time as you start to have a product and you get to live in the product. And I think what's amazing kind of 18 months into our journey is this ability to be dog fooding the product every day. And that's awesome. And so actually being in product is drastically more than in Figma, which was probably a year ago.
Yeah.
And I'd say, I mean, just look naturally with more partners and faster development cycles, etc. There's just a lot more what feels like action each day. And so the part you sometimes miss is that independent thinking time where you can just
Mhm.
like have 2 or 3 hours and just really audit through what you learned and kind of keep those insights. And you just have to find other dedicated time to kind of sit down and think through all of that.
Yeah, that makes some sense. And actually, just for anyone who doesn't know, what's the like Polaroid snapshot of today? What is Tabs like? What
Yeah,
where are you in that growth cycle? Number of people, all that kind of stuff. What do you?
absolutely. Yeah. So company, kind of in the post seed journey, um, roughly 20 to 30 people based in New York, really focused again in the office of the CFO,
Mhm.
creating what we believe is the most dynamic and simple way for companies to automate their revenue in the finance stack. So everything from accounts receivable, handling your deferred revenue or revenue recognition, as well as doing things like renewals and understanding your cash forecasting, all in a single piece of software, which is easy to go live with quick one-click integrations into products like QuickBooks. So that's kind of who we are as a company. We're in our kind of still what I would call in our very early innings of market presence. We came out of stealth about 4 months ago and have been
Mhm.
rapidly growing with B2B clients in the US, particularly focused on businesses that are in their first, call it under 100 million in revenue in the US market.
And how is your team organized right now? Do you have like a leadership? As you mentioned, there's functionalization that kind of
Yeah,
evolves and happens, right? And there's like different verticals within the company, different functions. Like, do you have a leadership team that you meet with that is it the same people that you started with? Like, do you ever talk to the other people in the company? How do you see that
yeah.
evolving?
I'd say it's still a very, from the beginning of like some of the nonprofits I worked with in
Mhm.
college, now like very kind of tied to the Quaker way of being flat and nimble and
Yeah.
non-hierarchical. And I'd say, I mean, this, I kind of trained under a nonprofit in college called Telluride Association, and like that ability to create equal kind of voting and insights across the org is still like very important to how we work and kind of intellectual curiosity we bring across the
Mhm.
company, because the best products come from people in the field and the best insights around how we sell often come from designers. And so I think that's been foundational, though there's like some early innings of functionalization. Like we do need like a customer journey and handoffs between marketing, sales, support, success, product. I very much think still as an early company builder and operator, there's really the best way to think about it is how do we build demand? With that, how do we create supply? And in that, where does operations kind of sit in the middle to help along the way for implementation, onboarding, support, and success? And so I don't yet think we're functionalized. I really think about it as
Right.
we divide and conquer, driving a ton of demand, bringing in really good customers that allow us to understand our ICP, supplying them with our product, often realizing there may be a gap and quickly compounding that to product so that we can take to a broader domain. And I think that kind of value prop of how the organization works has been critical for our ability to focus and very with a lot of agility react to important insights and hopefully get quicker on our journey to product market fit.
Well, I mean, it is interesting hearing you talk about how late in college you were thinking about a career path that was effectively like one of the highest order thinking professions that we have. It's like let's think about problems that are interesting to me and maybe no one else, and like and kind of take those and figure out ways to solve them and research them effectively.
Yeah,
But it does seem to me that in talking to you and talking to other founders, there's a couple things that seem to have come through there in terms of how you operate as a founder, and by necessity or by definition I should say, like that's how it's going to cascade in the organization, where it seems like there's a really high degree of like what if curiosity around these things. There's not a lot of rank. Like it's really sort of a workshop mentality almost, from what I'm understanding. And I think that's interesting to I don't know, just from my perspective, to take that kind of a group of people. It's like let's just take 30 really smart people who like to be independent and solve problems of any type, and then just find something that a lot of people might find really boring, and just like attack it, and figure out if there's a better way to rebuild this whole thing that a lot of people took for granted. So I actually think that it's you look back on it, it's actually not all that dissimilar from maybe where you are kind of a professor in a sense. It's just you're very tactical.
but I think a lot of what professorship or just some research based academia teaches you is constantly be like first principle,
Right.
approach everything with first principles and try to bring collaborative environments in which you learn and have dialogue. And we do it all the time. I mean, whether we think our next month out from a roadmap standpoint, there's no like Ali CEO vision that is the buck stops there. I
Right.
take insights from all of my very intelligent folks who are in the field with customers building our products, understanding some of the constraints in a world of AI and thinking
Hmm.
about where's the puck today and where do we need to be hyper focused while also being cognizant of where the puck will go as we scale. But
Hmm.
constantly tethering that pragmatism, I think has to date been a really good formula for us to move very quickly with the customer in mind. And I think that
Hmm.
that element is something I'd love to be able to preserve as long as we can until hopefully we get closer to kind of what I would consider product market fit.
Right. Can we spend like 2 or 3 minutes talking about fundraising? Because
Sure.
you've done it really well, I think, compared
Yeah.
to some people. And I'm curious if it feels that way to you, or if it kind of felt like banging your head against the wall from time to time, like many people say, or do you feel as if it's gone pretty well for you, and what really resonated? Because I know a lot of founders are always curious about this.
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One, I mean, we're early when it comes to being a pre-seed seed company. We've been beneficiaries of a great number of funds who are excited to invest early, even in this macro. So I think that's one. I think
Hmm.
the two or three things that have been particularly helpful. One is we've brought together a great team that is in person in a market like New York, and I do think that's very important when investors are fundraising, when you have the right pieces, whether that's around demand, supply, and having the right level of experience to build something and having seen it before. I think that's one thing that's definitely helpful in our unique case. The second is just trying to go after a big market and articulate why this is an extremely large market and why there are other companies that have addressed this market, albeit different problems. I think that's really unique. I think the one thing that has been particularly the most helpful, and it's not something I learned as an academic, maybe I learned later on being a consultant or just like a really simple person, is just communicating what it is you do, what is the problem you're going after, what is the bigger vision, but then conversely, what is the very simple ways you are going to activate that in the short term.
Hmm.
Simplicity I've actually found to be the most helpful in capital raising. I think a lot of people are just looking for something that they can understand very clearly, especially when you think about the volume of just pitches and blurbs and potential technology investors see every day. And it's often the most simple that stick out versus I think I've had a lot of friends and other founders I know that just kind of try to lay it all out there. And that's often the hardest part of storytelling. So I would summarize all of that as the simplicity element to be the most important. And oftentimes when I try to relay a pitch or anything like that, I often just like sit down and Apple Notes or even my own like iPhone or on a simple Word document. I just try to outline this story and I say, look, can I very simply do this? And when I turn it off, can I very simply tell this story to someone who
Hmm.
is not in technology or venture capital or startups, and would they understand it? And if that litmus test doesn't make sense and there's a lot of verbiage being used and a lot of AI this and AI that, I think that's a good place to pause and go back to simplicity.
Yeah. And the last thing I want to touch on here is growth and how you think about growth. And I know like we were talking about this before, just some phases with this. And I think we worked together at a stage where you were looking to talk to a lot of people, and we found some good ways to talk to a lot of people. And then, you've transitioned into this phase where there's a little more sophistication, I think, and you guys have a really nice, robust infrastructure from what I've seen around using multiple channels and thinking about how to scale an outbound team. I know that, given your attitude here, you have some smart people who are dealing with this, and they're doing a really good job with it. But what is it like? Do you have a sense from the founder's seat of how that evolves and how much more sophisticated it gets and where growth is going as you get into the next phase? Like what you might need to be doing that you're not doing now.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, Nate, it's probably the top thing I ask myself. It's being a very demand oriented founder and CEO. I can certainly say I'm never comfortable. And in fact, the world we're headed in now with email degradation and a lot of other just noise in the macro,
Yeah.
it's probably one of the top things that keeps me up at night. I think the few things we are doing is one is not being single threaded. Like something may work really well for a month, but to believe that's just going to work for an entire quarter or a year. So I think diversification, how we think about growth, is huge. I
Hmm.
think the second is we're in some ways going back a decade. Like the areas of growth that are the most helpful is like getting on a phone call and getting people comfortable, including myself, to cold call again and
Yeah.
for referrals. Like there may be a client who's transitioning as the CFO at a company and say, who else do you know? Or just curious, where are you going next, or how are you thinking about your career after you take the summer off? And some of our best clients have been folks who graduated when they learned about us at company one, and even in 6 months, we were the first vendor of choice as they got brought in to their
Hmm.
next organization. And so, I think the way we think about growth is constantly thinking about it, never comfortable, testing a variety of things, but doing things that people just did a decade ago, like cold calling and trying to drip a relationship that may not create instant gratification, but it won't take 6 years. Something that if you can kind of patiently work through it tends to be our best customers 3 to 6 later. And so in all of that, I think the other part of the Incendium playbook is you just need a lot of volume. Like you have to go
Yeah.
after a market where you're never constrained by the number of people you can talk to. And I
Hmm.
think that's ultimately kind of the light that keeps us moving is there's constant lottery tickets for us to go out there and try to go grab.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, we'll stop it there. I know you're probably itching to get back to talking to more customers and chatting more, but thanks for joining us, Ali. Always appreciate it. We'll be in
Hey,
touch in the
it's
next
great.
couple weeks.
I'm excited to see you in New York soon. You have a great day.
I'll see you soon. See ya.